Hello and a very warm welcome to Bharata First. You're watching Big Picture with Frank Rausen Pereira. Since you're here, I would like to thank you for your continued support. For those of you who haven't already subscribed, please like the video, subscribe, hit the bell icon and then all notifications. Do follow our social media handles for all the latest updates, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter to get some incisive content. The Bharata First team is running a daily quiz. The winner will get to interview me in a program called Hot Seat. Details are in the description of this video. Here are the UPI IDs for those who would like to contribute. They are also in the description of the video. A small contribution you make will be a giant leap for us to keep bringing you this content. Do continue to show your love and support. Now to the discussion. Total military expenditure worldwide increased by 2.6% in 2020, reaching almost $2 trillion despite the global coronavirus pandemic and economic downturn, according to a report published by the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Due to the global fall in gross domestic product, the so-called military burden, military spending as a share of GDP rose to an average of 2.4%, up from 2.2% in 2019, the biggest year-on-year increase since the financial crisis of 2009. Chinese military expenditure grew for the 26th year in a row. However, military spending by the world's most populous country still fell behind the world's biggest military spender, the United States, where spending in 2020 increased by 4.4% over 2019 to reach an estimated $778 billion. In this edition of Big Picture, we will analyze the trends in global military expenditure. Joining me on the program today are Air Vice Marshal retired P.K. Srivastava, defense expert, Major General Shashi Asthana, retired strategic affairs expert, and Elizabeth Raw, resident fellow, American Enterprise Institute. Thank you to my guests for joining me on this edition of Big Picture. General, let me start the program with you first. Let's talk about the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. Before we get into the findings itself, let's talk about the organization, how it comes about with this research, and what exactly does this research tell us?
This research gives us the trends of a military expenditure. It's fairly accurate for the simple reason because they not only calculate as to what has been declared by the companies, by the various countries, they also calculate as to what kind of capabilities have been developed by those countries. Now, there are certain display of those capabilities, like say so many aircraft and so much of naval hardware China has shown and displayed to the world. Now, this entire thing is converted into money and then calculated back and then matched with whatever expenditure they have declared, because most countries have some amount of hidden expenditure as far as defense is concerned, and those hidden expenditures are normally, they don't come out so easily. So that is how they calculate and check back as to what has been declared, and then they come out with a reasonable figure. They have an entire section dealing with it, and they have a fair amount of statistical data keeping, which is quite recognizable in the world. So that is how they come out with these kinds of figures, and the trends, as they have said. Let me put it this way: United States, the expenditure is more than the next 6 countries put together, which is more than the defense expenditure of rest of the world put together. And this is not the trend of today. This trend has been there for quite some time. So a lot of people, you would have seen a lot of media getting gaga as to, okay, China has developed so much, China has this thing, but there is a fair amount of gap. Today, what we see that during in South China Sea and in these areas, we find that, okay, China is flexing muscles. It is because the land assets of China, the land air assets of China, they are effective in South China Sea and the nearby areas. The moment China comes out of that, they are no match to US Navy. And the lead which has been created over last 2 decades is far too much. So it's not all that easy to match the capabilities which US has put it, and US is not giving a walkover. Even this year budget, if US is $732 billion, China is 261. These are the declared figures. But even if you take the undeclared figures, there is a significant amount of gap. And also, I must tell you, China is a awkward country wherein the internal security budget is more than the defense budget, and the kind of surveillance budget which they have which they have on, which they do to their normal citizens. Even that budget is also quite a bit of budget. So, in a nutshell, I mean, this is the trend, and certainly as India, we are the largest importers. So, therefore, the defense procurement is something which I will talk about it a little bit later as we go along. Back to you.
Yes, all right. Thank you. Elizabeth, let me bring you to the picture now. Since we're talking about trends, here's another interesting trend. So the global GDP shrank by 4.4%, in a pandemic year, but the military expenditure rose by 2.6%. So clearly, the pandemic has not affected or impacted military spending, and the world, militaries around the world, governments around the world are spending on defense.
That's true, and a lot of people won't be happy to see, and haven't been happy to see, that military expenditure has continued in this manner while countries were struggling to deal with COVID-19. And if I can just make another quick point, SIPRI, which the name stands for the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, was actually founded by the Swedish Parliament after World War II to essentially celebrate Sweden staying out of not having been invaded during World War II, which was quite something, and it's something to be extremely grateful for, because every other country except Switzerland got invaded. Every other European country got invaded. So Sweden was you might say, very relieved and grateful not to have been invaded, and so the Swedish Parliament started SIPRI as a result to study peace. But as the general has just said, the military expenditure has grown for quite some time. It's not just this year, but for decades, including the decade since the end of the Cold War. And that includes 2020, when I think many people would have thought that governments would shift spending, military spending, towards COVID spending and other contingency spending, keeping people in work or in furlough at least. So, but the point about that is that it's not that easy to shift spending from the armed forces to other spending, because a lot of the money goes to procurement, and these are, as my two colleagues here will be able to explain much better than I, but that funding is dedicated or allocated over years. You can't just shift it because something happens in 1 year. So I think that is the paradox of defense spending. It looks like when a contingency happens somewhere else, you should be able to shift at least a bit of that money, but it's actually locked into multi-year projects where you can't just take it out. And that is the dilemma, or the paradox, if you will, of a year like 2020, when we needed money elsewhere, but it was difficult to move.
Absolutely. AVM, let me bring you to the picture now. So let's also talk about what is it that governments are spending on, really, as far as their militaries are concerned. And like we've already discussed in the program, military expenditure has just risen with every year. Is it modernization? What is the focus on, really?
I think it's a very good point, and my colleagues have really introduced the subjects very well on the forum. The issue being how the money is being spent, because SIPRI also has a role in analyzing the conflicts, also has a role in setting up the peace initiatives, also has a role in disarmament. So how this money is getting spent, is it being spent on the foot soldiers, or it's being spent on technologies which are going to bring even more lethal weapons? And if today's context, if we see in the scenario in which we are living, I would say about the increase in defense expenditure vis-a-vis the GDP is because of the COVID-19 putting the GDPs on a lower side. It's not actually in those terms. Had the GDPs been going in the same way as they were going, probably this figure wouldn't have come out. But that being said, the issue is that technology has taken the fulcrum again. And now the AI, the artificial intelligence, machine learning, neural networks, they are taking a lot of big form and very, I would say, the things which must be studied by SIPRI, how the money is being spent. If I give some figures which we come to know through the SIPRI, that on AI, if US is spending nearly 3.9 billion or something, China is spending some 5 billions on that. And tomorrow's world, where we are talking about autonomy, we are talking about crunching the OODA loop, And we are also talking about authorizing robos to get into the battlefield and take decisions on themselves. And once we talk about the OODA loop, we also talk about it's a supervised OODA loop at the moment, that if you launch a missile or something, the human being is in the loop. But tomorrow that can be handed out to an algorithm. And that's a very menacing way forward. There have been a lot of intellectuals, a lot of people who are commenting upon it, including the Stuart Russell, who keeps writing about artificial intelligence. But this being the thing, the money is being spent on R&D, money is being spent on sustenance. As far as Indian case is concerned, we have a very small part, actually, if you see, which gets spent on modernization. India has two challenges. The one challenge is that how do you upgrade yourself in technology so that you are able to make weapons indigenously, which will have its own economic dividends for the country. And the second is, how do you modernize and spend money on R&D? And R&D has huge dividends. We have seen from World War II onwards, if the radars came up, they also went into the healthcare and other systems in the civilian use. If the computing came up, the internet came up, it went into use for the civilians too. That means technology which gets developed because of the technology being developed for the military gets automatically permeated in the civil sector, and which is a very potent part of it. So looking at the trends, I'm not really concerned that they are spending into technology as far as the armament part is concerned, but I'm really concerned about, are they going to make the weapons autonomous? In the sense, weapons will have the ability to choose the target and then hit the target. The last lethal thing, will the lethality be handed over? As of now, it's not being handed over. There are a lot of debates on that, but it may happen soon because part of the algorithm, the systems are there, whether we talk about Vikr, the robo tank of Russia, or we talk about Brimstone initiative, or we talk about code, what is there with DARPA, all over it's spreading out. So one has to see these trends, and I think CIPRI is studying and doing a good job. They also organized a session on AI and how autonomous the weapon can be. So that's where the study, apart from the studying the budgets which happen, which are now sum total is nearly 2 trillion, and somebody can come up with an analysis that the people who spend more on defense are also the people who are more prosperous. So there's some kind of guns and butter kind of strategy which is being employed. So one has to find a right balance. The right balance is investment in technology is not bad, but making weapons autonomous, that debate has to carry on. I'm using your forum to sparkle this debate. This is a very huge debate which must keep taking in international forum, primarily at CIPRI. CIPRI is doing a job on that, but it needs to be taken up more intensely. That's what I say in the first go. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think that's good you started this debate. Let's continue this discussion on this line itself and take the discussion forward on this line. General, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. Are we creating more dangerous weapons? Are we heading into a far more dangerous times? I mean, we all can still remember, even though the Cold War was so long ago, we all still know exactly how it was and what kind of an impact it had around the world. Is that another situation that we are heading into? Only difference being the domains will be different and maybe the countries may be different now.
Certainly, we are heading towards more lethal weapon systems, and all the research and developments are actually hinting towards that. That's number one. Number two, even in the domains of warfare, earlier we never talked of health security as one of the major facets of national security. Today, it is one of the major facets of national security. We never thought of the lethality of biological weapon to the extent today that we are thinking. Because if you talk of some suspicion that perhaps this virus was either leaked or whatever, that debate will, I think, never end. That's a separate issue. But the fact is, a lethality of biological weapon has been demonstrated by virtue of the spread of COVID-19. So therefore, these new domains of warfare, AI he spoke about, and I talked of the biological warfare. These are certainly the areas of concern, and therefore they are also certainly the areas of discussion in United Nations, that there has to be a cap, and there was a United Nations Convention on NBC, that is nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare, and then it became a convention for weapons for mass destruction. Now, We are the AI as of now. People can say, no, I'm only using it for robotics or I'm only using it for ABCD, but then it can also become a weapon of mass destruction at some point of time. So therefore, I think there is a need for convention. There is a need for certainly more debate on this issue. Coming on to some other points on what my previous panelist has said, I totally agree with both the panelists. One is the R&D part of it. You see, United States spends almost about 2.8 to 3% of the defense budget on R&D. We spend almost about 0.86% on R&D. R&D is costly, and the defense manufacturing is also related to the profit which you make out of defense, because today maximum profit is made out of the sale of defense equipment by United States. So therefore, when they spend more, they reap more as well. So defense manufacturing is a profitable industry, provided we make it profitable. And that is why a lot of policies which Indian government has done in the recent past are actually helping that, like negative list, increasing the FDI from 49% to 74%. The case of defense manufacturing GOCO model, that is government owned and commercially operated model. We are also looking at out of the priority list when we have to buy, because we are the largest buyer, which is not a very good tag for any defense for a country like of the size of India, with the compulsions which we have as far as threat is concerned. You also mentioned at one point of time as to why the defense is increasing well despite COVID. One of the reasons is the threat is also increasing. And other point was very well brought out by the Air Marshal, that the GDP has sunk, so therefore the figure is looking a little awkward. So that's another issue. Lot of other things which are being done is, for any defense forces, you have to have a model of 30% state-of-the-art equipment, 40% current equipment, and 30% outgoing equipment, or equipment which is about to be phased out. So we unfortunately have now much more current equipment and the outgoing equipment, and state-of-the-art is less. So that is why you would have seen that we are going with a model that, okay, Rafales, it's not only that we need only Rafales, that is the state-of-the-art part of it. The current part of it will be Tejas, and then subsequently the other Mirage and other things will be the last part of it. So I think we are looking at the model holistically, and perhaps India is also looking at in that manner. Back to you.
Absolutely. Elizabeth, let me come back to you now. Let's also look at it from another perspective and take the discussion forward in terms of, how do we ensure that we don't get into this deadlier phase? Who's going to be the watchdog? Who's going to ensure that we don't get there?
That is the dilemma we're facing. Who is the leader? Which country is the leader that has the global weight to say, well, let's all get together and negotiate new arms control treaties, especially relating to unmanned vehicles of drones, unmanned drones, or rather drones, because drones are unmanned. But which country is going to do that? Which country has the global weight and credibility to pull everybody else together and essentially cajole them into this new arms control regime? And that's where I'm concerned, because we have seen this explosive growth in drone investments by all kinds of countries. And we saw just recently how Azerbaijan very successfully used drones against Armenia, drones made in Turkey. And it just demonstrates, I think, what future wars may look like. In fact, they are already happening, these wars. So it's clear that it's in nobody's interest, whether you're a peacenik or whether you want large armed forces. It's in nobody's interest that we have even more ways in which countries can engage in conflict against one another, because it's mutually unbeneficial. So I think in the past we had the United States and the Soviet Union leading these arms control efforts, simply because it was in their mutual interest to limit, as it was then, their enormous nuclear stockpiles. They had agreed on very little else, but they agreed on that. And I just don't see how we'll get an agreement how we'll get a sort of a couple of countries to team up like they did to reduce nuclear stockpiles, to essentially reduce the danger, the risk of nuclear war. And hopefully the US will regain some of its credibility and may be able to work with a few other countries to get some motion into this, or some movement into this. But at the moment, I'm concerned about the rapid spread of drones and how it will become almost a sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy that you need drones in conflicts against other countries.
Absolutely. And it's a scary proposition, isn't it, AVM? I mean, the way warfare is conducted nowadays has changed completely. It seems like a free-for-all as well. Even smaller countries wanting to buy weapons from all around the world just to ensure that they can put their enemy in their places. In such a kind of a situation, what do we need to do?
So you raised a very, very important point for these times. And Elizabeth General has talked about the biological warfare, which we are still debating what is this pandemic is all about. And Elizabeth talked about the drones. And drones and autonomous weapons, when we talk about, we are not talking about weapons which search, seek, select automatically. We are also talking about the autonomy of the weapons. The weapon itself, the algorithm itself can, decide to kill. The algorithm has the power to kill. And these kinds of things, I always think of CIPRI as an institute which recruits to countries and to nations and nation states, to all the national leaders, what should be their way forward, where the budgets, military budgets must be spent and where they must not be spent. And all the great, philosophers and thinkers who are in this field of AI, who write about the textbooks, like I'm very fond of Stuart Russell, who has always raised this issue. And this issue has been raised on many forums. But CIPRI is particularly empowered, intellectually empowered to raise this issue, because they also talk about peace. They also talk about disarmament. And disarmament, the earlier days, we talked about the nuclear disarmament. Now we have to talk about the autonomy or robust kind of disarmament. We are talking about that we don't want robotic soldiers. We don't want those machines fighting for us, fighting for the country, and taking decisions to kill through algorithms. It can go horribly wrong. And just to I shouldn't be adding that fear, but I think that makes a debate possible, that in today's times, you can buy a drone less than $500, sorry, not rupees, $500, and put some kind of weapon into it, a gun or something which you can fire from. It has been done in the US by a teenager, but it was done on his own property. And there are no rules where it says that he cannot, neither the gun was unauthorized, nor the drone was unauthorized. He just put them together and was able to fire from his remote control in his own property. So there's no law in the US which says you can't do it. But what he has demonstrated, that anyone else with some other kind of thinking or mind, it can become a horrible scenario for the world. So CIPRI, an institute like CIPRI, needs to bring forward this issue on the forum, intellectual forum, and start a massive debate about it as to what all we need to do and where is the boundary line. And that boundary line or threshold, what you call, where it must be arrested. There have to be national laws and regulations framed out for this. I'll say one thing has happened in US after the World War. What they did, they came out with DARPA. DARPA is nothing but a structure. And sometimes people tend to call them a group of mad scientists. They only do technology research. They spend where it is high investment, but high return. The probability may be very low, but the return in terms of technology is very high. And they have come about, if you really study them well, all the technologies which are needed to give the autonomy to weapon in terms of hardware and software is available today. The only thing which is holding it or not letting any government, openly declare is the thought that this is unethical. So this thought must continue and continue forever, because the technology is right here available with you, and it is being developed at a very rapid pace. The kind of investments which are going in WIPO, the kind of filings which are happening, World Intellectual Property Organization, in terms of AI, the China is just next. to US in terms of filing the patents. And they are not very far behind because they are not catching up in the other areas, as General has already pointed out. There's been a decades of efforts. But in this area,
Yes.
Chinese are very active. And it's a closed kind of government. We don't really, world doesn't really come to know about everything what they are doing. The internal budgets are higher than the defense budgets, which is absolutely mind-boggling. So in that scenario, I think a role can be played by CIPRI, since we're talking about CIPRI, and it has that mandate to itself, and they can really initiate a debate. And I wish through your, channel or forum, that we are able to even more ignite this issue. The issue is not that people have not been talking about. Paul Sharey has talked about in many, many ways, and he's come out with a book called Army of None, and that gives very graphically what all can go wrong. So taking all that account, we need to keep this discussion on debate alive and take it forward and request CIPRI to come out with certain norms which need to be followed universally, so that we can keep a check on our desire to dominate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Time to get quick closing comments now from all my panelists with the best way forward, starting first with you, General.
Okay. Firstly, CIPRI alone may not be able to do it, but I'll carry your point because next week I have a meeting with CIPRI on webinar. That's one part of it. But notwithstanding that, the fact is that all the treaties are basically, you need all P5 on board for all kinds of treaties. Like INF treaty had to fail for the simple reason because China was out of it, and they were making weapons which were out of that treaty, and that's why the Russians and a treaty between Russia and America didn't had a meaning. So apparently, I think the whole world will have to get together. It has to be a global pressure. All P5s have to be on board, and organizations like, as he rightly said, there are a number of organizations. It's not only CIPRI, which are looking at the peace initiatives, and and certainly these organizations need to take this point, and it must be debated. Certainly, there's no doubt about it. Back to you.
Absolutely, Elizabeth.
Yeah, since your audience is the next generation, I would just highlight to them how important it is to get more rules in place. And to those of us who grew up during the Cold War, it was just so obvious that we had arms control treaties for nuclear weapons. Now we have a new generation of weapons, as we have been discussing on this program, unmanned weapons, and they may not be as individually as dangerous as atomic bombs, but collectively they are extremely dangerous. And I think it's in everybody's interest to get those norms into place. And that's where people like your viewers, when they begin to take on positions of responsibility in society, where they can play an important role, both to put pressure on decision makers, and maybe when they become decision makers themselves, to be part of helping that global regime take place and be upheld. Over.
Absolutely. And AVM, close the show for us with your quick concluding remarks.
So I would say that we need to, the international community has come together like they have come together for climate change. And this should be treated as that kind of initiative. And based on that, I would say the CIPRI can play a fulcrum role. There are United Nations, which can play a very, very important role of force to taking it forward. But what will bring this kind of thing to peace is that the national order, which is already existing, it should not be challenged by any powerful nation. So in case a nation very powerful, which is very powerful, it tries to expand itself, or it tries to become more ambitious, I will not be taking the name of the country involved, and tries to increase its footprints, if that can be contained, the international community can come forward and say the order is there and we respect this order and will not allow any kind of force to change this order. I think then the trend will see a downward trend, and more will spend on human well-being, or the, I would say, towards the healthcare, infrastructure, or quality of life. So that initiative has to, so why I always talk about CIPRI at the most, because they have been giving recommendations of government, and probably on their recommendation, UN can also be charged up, and we can come out with an initiative, international community initiative, which looks into this in this context. Let's not have war, let's have peace.
Absolutely. Let's not have war. Let's have peace and let's spread peace as well. On that note, I'll call it a wrap on this edition of Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. What's coming out of this discussion is that we are heading into dangerous territory with drones and autonomous weapons. Warfare has changed over the years and the focus is now on AI, and without a watchdog, it's a free-for-all. CIPRI could play an important role in bringing about some kind of a rules-based order and maybe even take the lead in trying to renegotiate arms treaties. Till then, we have to keep telling ourselves to make peace and not war. Once again, thank you for your continued support. For those of you who haven't already subscribed, please like the video, subscribe, hit the bell icon and then all notifications. Do follow our social media handles for all the latest updates, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter to get some incisive content. The Bharata First team is running a daily quiz. The winner will get to interview me in a program called Hot Seat, which airs on Saturdays. The details are in the description of the video. Here are the UPI IDs for those who would like to contribute. They are also in the description. A small contribution you make will be a giant leap for us to keep bringing you this content. So do continue to show your love and support. That's it from me. See you again next time.